There's many a recipe out there touting crispy, baked sweet potato fries, but chances are if you've actually tried one, or many versions like I did, you've ended up with a thick orange stick that is browned, and it may even have some crispy edges, but it still unquestionably has the sweet potato sog. So let's stop kidding ourselves. Due to the carbohydrate makeup of sweet potatoes compared to a regular potato like a russet, it's basically impossible to make crispy sweet potato fries in the oven. Or is it? Hey everyone, I'm Ethan, a home cooking nerd who likes to find better ways to cook and share them with all of you. Today is all about the sweet potato. Specifically, we'll be trying to make a crispy sweet potato fry that is baked in the oven. Before I actually get to the science behind the techniques and the recipe, let's first go over what I'm looking for in the ideal final product. You see, I want a sweet potato fry with a nice golden orange and brown appearance that has a balance between a crisp exterior and a fluffy interior with that nice potato bite. I also want a long and thin french fry that holds together. No thick wedges or falling apart thin ones for me. Lastly, I want all of this while minimizing the amount of oil used, which is why I'll specifically be focusing on low oil methods, as I assume most of us who are baking sweet potato fries are probably doing so for a lower calorie option compared to deep fried or oven fried methods that use quite a bit of oil. So let's answer the question, why don't sweet potato fries crisp up like regular potato fries? This one is simple. It all comes down to starch versus sugar. And as we've touched on multiple times on the channel, starches in things like french fries or bagels hydrate and then gel on the surface, which is what gives us a crisp crust. Sugar, on the other hand, gets black and burnt. For a potato called sweet, it's an easy bet that it has more sugar than your typical potato. Specifically, from the USDA's food database, 100 grams of a raw russet potato has 18 grams of carbs, which is made up of 16 grams of starch, 1.3 grams of fiber, and just 0.7 grams of sugar. Compare that to 100 grams of raw sweet potato, which has 20 grams of carbs and is made up of 13 grams of starch, 3 grams of fiber, and 4 grams of sugar. Now you may be thinking, does roughly 3 grams of sugar really make that big of a difference? Well, if the sweet potato stayed at those levels of sugar and starch while cooking, it probably wouldn't, but they don't stay at those levels while cooking because of amylase. Where have we heard that before? Hoagie rolls. The amylase enzyme was present in the diastatic malt powder that we added to the dough. The amylase converts starches in the flour into sugar, providing the yeast with more to feed on, and this enzyme is also in sweet potatoes and does the exact same thing. This is why if you munch on a raw sweet potato, it's not exactly sweet, but if you compare that to one that's been roasted, the sweetness is off the charts. Specifically, from On Food and Cooking by Harold McGee, we learned that amylase attacks the starch and breaks it down to maltose, a sugar. When cooked, this starts to happen at 135 degrees Fahrenheit, and it stops around 170 degrees Fahrenheit when the enzyme is killed. Harold also notes that in certain varieties of sweet potatoes, up to 75% of the starch can be turned to sugar. Let's take another look at those numbers. For a sweet potato with 75% of the starches turned to sugar, we are now looking at just 4.25 grams of starch, 3 grams of fiber, and 13.75 grams of sugar. That lack of starch is what makes it basically impossible to achieve crispness, regardless of if you are deep frying or cooking in the oven. But you've probably had crispy sweet potato fries out at a restaurant, so how is it possible? Once again, this is simple. We need more starch. There's two options that we can try here. One is limiting the amount of starch that gets turned to sugar, or two is add starch back in. Remember how I said the amylase stops working at above 170 degrees Fahrenheit? Well, if we put the sweet potato fries in boiling water, which is energy dense, it will spend less time in that 135 to 170 range compared to slow roasting it in the oven, meaning less starch is turned to sugar. I tested two fries. One was baked without boiling and one was baked with boiling, and as we can see, the one that was boiled does hold its structure better and is slightly crispy, but it's still not what we're looking for. This is where adding starch comes to the rescue and makes a big difference. As Dan Souza from America's Test Kitchen explains, adding hot potatoes to a cornstarch slurry will hydrate the starches and gel on the exterior of the sweet potato. When fried in hot oil, this creates a delectably crisp crust. And the slurry is key, as just adding a sprinkle of cornstarch on the potatoes doesn't allow those starches to hydrate and gel on the surface, which is what we are after. Now, here's a crunch test for one that has boiled in a cornstarch slurry and then fried in peanut oil. I also would like to point out that I will not be boiling my fries in baking soda like Dan did to weaken the pectin, but instead I will be boiling with a splash of vinegar to strengthen the pectin because I want a thin french fry that holds together. When a thin french fry is boiled in baking soda, it leads to this. So now that we know how to make crispy, deep-fried sweet potato fries, is it possible to get them crispy in the oven? Absolutely. For my oven, this is the method that I found works best for a low oil option. I place a wire rack over a baking sheet and evenly space out the slurried sweet potatoes to promote airflow and even cooking. Then for my oil choice, it's peanut. As you may remember from the oven fries recipe, it crisps more efficiently due to the extra saturated fat. And I just give a very light drizzle over the top of fries, and for the whole sheet, I use just 15 grams of oil, and actually that's counting the oil that dripped down, so it's probably more like 10 grams. And I was able to get them plenty crispy with just 15 grams of oil total, so it's definitely a low caloric option. Now, if you do have a convection setting on your oven or an air fryer, I would absolutely use those as they are more efficient at heat transfer than my basic oven due to the air movement, so you likely need a little less time when you make yours. That being said, let's quickly walk through the step-by-step recipe and then do a little taste test. To start, set a large pot of water on medium-high heat to bring to a boil. Meanwhile, you can peel the sweet potatoes and slice them into roughly 1/3 inch sheets, then into roughly 1/3 inch thick fries. Once those are all cut up, preheat the oven to 475 degrees Fahrenheit. Once the water has boiled, add a large 3-finger pinch of salt and a nice splash of vinegar, stirring to dissolve the salt. Then add in the sweet potato fries to the boiling water and set a timer for 6 minutes. And again, the vinegar is used to slow down the breakdown of pectin so the fries do not fall apart easily. While those are boiling, add 50 grams of cornstarch and 80 grams of cold water to a bowl. Stir that together until it is completely combined with no clumps remaining. When the timer is up, drain the fries into a colander and then immediately add them to the cornstarch slurry and toss it until it starts to thicken and stick to the fries. If you need a little more cornstarch, feel free to add it, and feel free to rough up the edges of the french fries with your fork if you would like. The mixture should lightly coat the fries. Once coated, set a wire rack over top of a baking sheet and move the fries to the wire rack, evenly spacing them so none of them are touching. Then, using a squirt bottle or spoon, just drizzle the peanut oil over the fries, trying to get an even coating over each one. Then add the sweet potatoes to the oven and set a timer for 15 minutes. Pull the baking sheet out and flip over the fries with a spatula, and at this point you should be able to notice some blistering on the outside, but the fries won't be overly crisp. If they do look a little bit dry, feel free to drizzle over more peanut oil, but add them back to the oven and bake for another 10 to 15 minutes. At this point, they should be slightly brown and crispy, though it could take longer depending on the size of the fry, how crowded the pan is, or the oil used. If they aren't crispy, just let them go a little bit longer. Slide the baked fries into a metal bowl and immediately add a pinch of salt and a couple cranks of fresh ground pepper. Then just toss the fries to absorb the seasoning, and you can feel free to add anything like spices or fresh herbs if you would like at this stage. Finally, turn them out to a serving bowl and serve with whatever dipping sauces you would like. And ladies and gents, this is the sweet potato fry I will be using from now on when I want to do them in the oven. And I couldn't be more floored with the results. And initially I did think this was gonna be a pretty easy video to film. I had like 1 or 2 key methods that I wanted to try, but then there were so many nuances that I just wasn't getting the final product. And I think I ended up doing like 7 or 8 different batches between the oven temperature and times, my oven rack setup with the baking sheet versus down low on no baking sheet or on no wire rack, and then how to do the cornstarch, whether it was better in slurry form or just a sprinkle. And eventually I got here and I couldn't be more happy. And I mean, the results speak for themselves, like the crunch. And sure, some of these bigger ones aren't gonna be like super crispy, but it's miles better than any other method or recipe that I have tried for baked sweet potato fries. And this is what I love so much about cooking, because there wasn't a recipe that was making the product that I wanted to make. I wanted thin French fries, I wanted them with minimal oil, but I still wanted them crunchy. And you know, through the science of cooking and learning about sweet potatoes, which I didn't know about the amylase. I didn't know about how it can convert it into sugars and how low the starch content is actually when they're baked. So all that was really eye-opening for me, and hopefully it was for you too, because it really does affect how and what you're trying to do with your final product, which for me is like the coolest part about cooking, is learning those basic techniques and science concepts and then putting them into practice to come up with the product that you want. And this was mine. So hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. I'll have the link to the recipe up on my website and down in the description below if you guys want to check it out. And if you do want to make these deep fried, they're so good deep fried. Literally, you just pop them in 350-degree peanut oil for 50 seconds, let them dry off, then pop them in for like 3.5 minutes, and you'll have the best like sweet potato fries ever. They're better than restaurant. So hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.